When I first became Catholic, I was unprepared for how difficult it was going to be to reform my life from what it had been to what I was hoping it would become. Like, when I was first introduced to what Catholicism taught and expected of its adherents, I realized that there's this whole range of behaviours that we call sins that I was going to have to divest myself of if I was really going to make a go of this thing. But this proved to be extremely difficult in some cases, especially as I found myself growing in certain kinds of virtues, because some sins just feel really good, and in fact, they would feel even more good after a period of avoiding them. And that pattern would bring me to the point of an inevitable question, sometimes often, which was, if sins are wrong, and God created us and the universe according to a certain kind of intelligibility where His mind is revealed to us and His intentions through nature, then why is it that some sins feel so good? In order to answer that question, it might be helpful to look at a micro use case that so exaggerates the qualities of what we're talking about here that it might make it easier for us to understand. So, from what I'm told, if your greatest ambition in life is hedonistic pleasure and the pursuit of it, then crystal meth may have some appeal for you. According to some page I found on the internet, this is what it's like to consume crystal meth. So the first effect is known as the rush, in which your heartbeat and your pulse and your metabolism all just take off and they start surging the effects of the drug throughout your entire body. And I'm not sure how accurate this is, but I'm told that meth raises your dopamine. Dopamine is like one of the pleasure chemicals in your brain to levels as high as 7 times of what is experienced during sex. The next phase is known as the high, in which you experience this unrivaled euphoria that convinces you that you are the most epic, self-confident, most attractive, the smartest, just the most amazing person in the entire world, and nothing can convince you otherwise. Next, you experience what's known as the binge, in which you become so obsessed with the feeling and the high that you're experiencing that you'll do whatever it takes to keep it going. And that usually translates into just taking more meth. And this can last for periods as long as 3 to 15 days. And with each boost of the drug, you will again experience a rush, but with each course, it lessens until no matter what you do or how much meth you take, you just feel nothing. The next phase is known as tweaking, in which it's no longer possible to experience that high or that rush anymore. And it's at this point in which the catastrophic effects on the brain and the body, everything that you've done to yourself, start to pronounce themselves. And so you start to experience these horrible feelings and cravings that can't be satisfied. And as well, you're in a state of like a completely psychotic state where you're trapped in your own world of nightmares and hallucinations and psychosis. The last step is known as the hangover, in which you regain consciousness, but in a horrible state of deterioration, dehydration, and starvation. And basically, you're just in the worst mental and physical condition you can imagine. And it's so intolerable that the only solution becomes taking more meth. And then this cycle of addiction starts to take shape. So we can look at use cases like this, or maybe you've even experienced something yourself where you've done something that you believed to be wrong or a sin, and you came away from it asking yourself or God even, if this is so wrong, why does it feel so good? Why did you design it that way? I think there are a couple considerations that can bring some insight into this question. The first is that most sins aren't some immersion into utter depravity. Usually they're a perversion of some good. Like sex is a good that God created that is a part of His plan for the propagation of life and that unifies people in relationships. But we can abuse sex through perversion. But that perversion usually still retains some measure of the original good that God created it with. So it's still possible to experience pleasure as a result of that small measure of good that still exists there, even though the act has been compromised. The second thing, and this is hard for me to state, so just bear with me as this unfolds, but while sin may be bad, you and I still retain some measure of innocence and goodness, which means that we're capable of experiencing the pleasure associated with being good to some degree. So with the meth example, a person who has never taken meth or other brain-altering drugs is someone who is capable of experiencing the pleasure that the drug promises because they have a healthy brain, or in other words, because they are good. But what meth does is it takes what's good in a person, which in this case is their normal brain function, and it abuses its potential by releasing an extreme surge of dopamine, which leads to a euphoric experience that their brain would not normally produce. So because they have a healthy brain, a good brain, they have the potential to experience all the pleasure that the drug promises. But as the example reveals, after they use it, their brain and their body succumb to a state of affliction from which it is no longer able to produce the pleasurable effects. So they go from a state of good and healthy brain function to a state of dysfunctional brain function that is no longer capable of receiving or experiencing pleasure. And this is how all drugs and addictions work. The first time you do it, you experience this incredible pleasure and euphoria that convinces you that anytime you want, you can just use this same trigger and it will produce the same effects. But the more you do it, addiction starts to set in, and then that experience, that pleasure, becomes further and further out of reach. And then it gets to a point where you're just using the drug to avoid the eventual withdrawal. And this is a profound allegory, or even just a demonstration of the nature of sin. Some sins, when we first embrace them, can produce an experience of pleasure. But that's not because the sin is good, it's because you are good, and that which is good can experience what is good, in this case, pleasure, even if it's tainted and compromised. But each time you embrace a compromise of sin, it changes you from someone who is good and has the full potential to experience the good effects of life, including pleasure, to someone who is intrinsically less good and therefore less capable of experiencing pleasure regardless of what act you're performing. The wretchedness of an evil person is one that can never experience the pleasure of happiness and of being good, much like the addict who continues to chase that same high that never revisits them. C.S. Lewis puts it this way: every time you make a choice, you are turning the central part of you into something a little different than it was before, and taking your life as a whole with all your innumerable choices. All your life long, you are slowly turning this central thing into a heavenly creature or a hellish creature, either into a creature that is in harmony with God and with other creatures and with itself, or else into one that is in a state of war and hatred with God and with its fellow creatures and with itself. To be the one kind of creature is heaven, that is, it is the joy and peace and knowledge and power. To be the other means madness, horror, idiocy, rage, impotence, and eternal loneliness. Each of us at each moment is progressing to the one state or the other. And this is why faith is such a merciful thing. Faith, at least on an intellectual level, means trusting in things that you don't know through experience. So in the case of meth, I don't really know what it's like to go through that progression of using it and then growing addiction. I don't have that experience. But I trust those who do have that experience and what they've told me, and that's how I avoid letting it happen to me. All of life is like that. We can trust those who have gone before us, as well as God who designed us, about what behaviors we should avoid and embrace, because they know through experience, as well as, omniscience. Or you can try it for yourself and potentially fall victim to a pattern that can spiral out of control and lead to something like addiction, and then at the very end, just to add insult to injury, revoke whatever pleasures it promised. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed that, then please consider subscribing and liking, and come find me on Facebook and Twitter. It's a huge help when you do that. It helps us get these videos in front of more and more people. And a big thank you goes out to You Catholic for presenting these videos. And if you want to support the making of these videos, then please consider supporting my work as a digital media and marketing expert. My company, Holdsworth Design, specializes in branding, web and graphic design, marketing, social media, videography, and all that kind of good stuff. So if you know of a parish, a diocese, a ministry, or a business that needs help in those areas, then please send them our way, and I'm sure we can help them out.